This podcast talks candidly and openly about issues of male sexual violence.
Hello, my name is George. I'm the host of the Beyond the Silence podcast, the official podcast of We Are Survivors. Thank you for joining us for part 1 of 2 of our very special birthday special, celebrating our 16th anniversary. We've got a wide range of guests from inside and outside of the organisation, some faces I'm sure you'll recognise. So come in and join us and celebrate the year of consent with us also. As a small warning to you, this episode contains explicit language as well as candid discussions of sexual violence and substance use. But I hope you enjoy. Well, without further ado, let me introduce my wonderful guest for today. So I will start off to my left, and actually, I should mention that this is a dual format podcast. So some of you will be joining us via video. If you're joining on an audio only channel, let me first attempt to describe the room to you so you've got a bit of a visualization. We've set up in a perfect recreation of the Last Supper. Unfortunately, none of the guests got the memo about bringing bread or wine, and I was feeling quite cheap. So we're sadly bereft of snacks or alcoholic beverages. That doesn't mean you have to be, so I hope you're sitting comfortably. And just to swing around, I haven't decided who's playing Judas yet, but there's plenty of time to find out. So first want to take a toilet break, we'll assign that to you. So on my left here, I've got Duncan Craig, OBE, CEO and founder of We Are Survivors, and also a psychotherapist in his own right. Duncan, happy to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Swinging around further to the left, I've got Dr. Michael Atkins. Michael is one of our beloved ambassadors. You are a postdoctorate researcher at the University of Manchester now. You've got a PhD in anthropology with visual media. Your work, of course, covers themes of sex work, the hidden secrets of Canal Street, the canals themselves, and gender identity in that context as well. But I have to give you an even longer introduction because you've got a secret identity, maybe not. As Cheddar Gorgeous, beloved by the nation drag star, winner of 4 coveted Rupeater badges. And on top of that, I think you won Celebrity Mastermind, talking about fantastical creatures from the British Isles.
I did.
Yeah, okay.
But that was very thorough.
Well, I didn't write your Wikipedia, but somebody did, and they did a very good job.
and as well as winning, won £3,000
£3,000
for We Are Survivors.
Oh, lovely. Fantastic.
Did you get an award?
You get a little trophy, yeah.
A trophy, that's what I
Yeah,
mean.
you get a little trophy and you get to sit in that big chair again, which is nice.
That's its own reward, I suppose. Well, we don't have any big chairs here, which is just as well. Graham, pleasure to have you.
What did that mean?
What a start.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. Graham, who is our designer and also senior communications coordinator here at We Are Survivors. Graham, you've been instrumental in changing our brand over the years, giving it a fresh coat of paint and helping sort of sell it. And I don't know, it's been the first thing that most people see when they walk in, which is quite an honour.
Thank you very much. And to follow that with such a lovely description, I was about to say I'm the chief colouring in guy. We are survivors. But yeah, it's great to be here.
Pleasure to have you here, mate. I've also got my manager here, so I'm going to be very, very kind to him right now. I'd like to introduce Daniel, who is the manager of community services here at We're Survivors. He's also a trained independent sexual violence advisor in his own right, which he won't let me forget about. He's since switched hats and joined the community team as its manager, and he's had a long journey here with the organisation as well. Daniel, it is a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for the intro, George. It's nice to be here.
And over on my right, I have Christos Tsounakis. Christos, you are the People and Culture Director at Autotrader, which is an organisation which is very renowned for its practices of diverse hiring and inclusivity. Beyond that as well, you are a member of our Board of Trustees. And I think, like me, fell into the trap of going to Manchester as a student and saying, yeah, I'll probably leave in a few years, and never really did. You've also played a role as the Vice President of Forever Manchester, which, like ourselves, is an organisation that supports and builds upon Manchester's community links. It is a pleasure to have you here today, Christos.
Good to be here, thank you.
And continuing over to my right, I have Gaynor. Gaynor is our ISVA Services Manager. She is our champion for justice. She is fighting in the courts day in, day out, when they're open, when the cases are running. And when she's not fighting in the courts, she's fighting down the telephone to try and get police officers to listen to her.
There's no trying about it. They're listening.
Gaynor, pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for the invite, George. Happy to be here.
Glad. Next up, we've got Jamie Dennis. Jamie Dennis, you are the founder and CEO of Man and Meetup, which is an organization that falls into a very close partnership with We Are Survivors. As part of that role, you've created a home that feels safe and comfortable for men across Manchester and Wolverhampton. And you've also played a vital part in supporting the efforts of our Outspoken program, which provides therapy to men and women in prisons across the northwest of England. Jamie, pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me, brother.
And finally, we've got my beloved colleague, Trung. Trung is not only a member of our community development team, but also moonlights, well, they're on the books, as a therapist here at We Are Survivors. So fulfilling a kind of a dual role and bringing us both sides of the coin today. Trung, pleasure to have you here as well.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's jump in now to actually looking back and turning the clock a little bit on this organization. Now, we've got something to celebrate today. We've heard that word 16th birthday thrown around. I can't quite seem to think what happens when people turn 16. I think they can buy alcohol with a substantial meal at a pub. I don't want to talk too much about substantial meals. I survived the pandemic like everyone here. I think they can legally own and drive a moped.
Yeah, under a certain CC or whatever it is.
Fair enough. I've never ridden on a moped, so yeah, okay, understandable. And there's one other thing I'm forgetting about, but I think we'll build towards that as we go on. First things first, and we won't just make it a show of hands because, once again, this is a dual format podcast. Who's been here the longest? Just going around the table, how many years have you been involved in the organisation? It's up to you if you want to talk about your time here as a client or as a staff member or just in your role as an ambassador. Who's willing to show off here? You two hold yourselves back for a moment. I'll start. I've been here 1 year and 1 month. Anyone else?
I think I've been here 9 to 10 years.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
I've been here 2.5 years on the staff list, but I did a bit of freelance before that.
Yeah.
And I've known Duncan for 25 years, so he's always been in my vicinity, offering work and advice and opportunities.
Any other takers?
Am I allowed to?
Yeah.
Saying I think I've been involved in one way or another since before its inception. But just through work that me and Duncan were doing together and conversations that we had, I've certainly been here since day one. And seeing Duncan on that journey of turning it from an organisation that was kind of in your house to an organisation that was borrowing somebody else's office to growing into the amazing, wonderful organisation it is today, supporting all the wonderful people it does.
Michael Atkins. I don't know why I always have to use your full title. Michael...
Which is the real secret identity, actually.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I was going to make that joke. You can take that away from me. I'm fine with that.
Dr. Michael Atkins.
Of course.
I would say was there at inception. In fact... way before Inception, the planning of Inception, because as Michael was saying, we used to do another project where we would be engaging with young men who were either at risk of sexual exploitation or were sex working. And we spent many a absolutely fucking freezing, pissing down wet evening walking around and around and around the areas of Manchester, city centre, where some of the lads were hanging out, doing business. And that's where the idea for the organisation was formed, on those, how cold is it, freezing cold nights.
I would say that I've been involved since what is known as the bitching phase of an organisation's development, which is when somebody is sitting down and noticing all of the ways that other organisations aren't doing what they want to do or are doing them really shit. And they're spending their time bitching and bitching and bitching about how the job isn't being done. It's before they get to the point where they go, oh, which is what you reached, where you went, oh, I better do it then.
Yeah.
And realizing that it was your responsibility to take on.
Yeah.
In a second, we're about to hear from another member of our Board of Trustees, and in fact, our Deputy Chair, Evan, about his role in that bitching phase way those years ago.
I'm Evan Chiswell, and I'm a founding trustee and deputy chair of We Are Survivors. So my journey with the organisation starts very much at its inception. Back in 2008, I was about 22 years old when Duncan and I first discussed an idea that he'd had that he was keen for me to be involved in. And after we met in Sackville Gardens to set the world to rights, I agreed to be amongst its first board members. And the part that I remember above all else from those early discussions is that silence was our biggest challenge. If nothing else, we vowed to start a conversation. And the powerful thing about identifying that silence is what you stand against is that every time a door closes, it only strengthens your resolve to burst through it. And 16 years later, it feels like we're very much still bursting through those doors. When my journey with We Are Survivors started, we had no funding, no premises, no experience of setting up a charity. But in the time since Survivors has thrived, it's been a driving force in starting a public conversation. It's helped countless people to break the silence. And it's planted the seeds that many more people will have a different experience than that which Duncan and many others faced before we existed. One where when you needed to talk, it was so hard to find someone that would listen, that would reassure you that you aren't alone, and that could say proudly that I and we are survivors. What am I looking forward to most in the year of consent? What I'm looking forward to most is that there is a year of consent. As I say, when my involvement started with We Are Survivors, silence was the biggest threat and our biggest challenge. Breaking silence is what draws a line in the sand and takes power back. And consent depends on a conversation, on self-empowerment. And so having a year which is committed exclusively to affirming why and how this conversation is so important feels like it resonates so deeply on what we set out to do in those early days of the organisation. And all these years later, I couldn't be prouder of We Are Survivors still taking on that challenge. So on your 16th birthday, I just want to say a massive happy birthday to We Are Survivors.
It's really funny hearing Evan effectively talk about those early days because I've just said like Michael was the person that I suppose helped me incubate the idea. Then Evan was, and the thing he didn't say was, he was a social work student originally, and then he were a drug service that myself and Gaynor worked at in a needle exchange. And then he'd finished his social work and was doing, I think it was something like human rights and politics or something like that. And it was because of that I ended up having a conversation with him to say, oh, I'm thinking of doing this. And because of the Blue Room, which is what Michael and I were doing, Evan was always really interested. And so that's where we kind of started talking. And as soon as he'd said yes about being a trustee, I then went to have a conversation with a couple of very close friends. And one of them said, my darling, I'll just do a run for you. And Christos put his PE kit on and legged it round Manchester and raised our first bit of cash.
No kidding.
Yeah, and I don't know why I suggested that because I never ran. So I think I saw it somewhere and things like that. I can do that most probably. Yeah. So,
I guess you could.
Yeah, but since then, I don't know. I've run. Then I filed a lot of, because I was doing sort of like loads of admin. I filed a lot, I remember, in that small room.
You ran like 3 or 4 times?
In my life, and that was it.
Was the other one for the 256 bus or?
No, I don't. What's a bus? I don't know.
from the paparazzi. My apologies.
No.
Admin, filing.
Admin. Yeah, but it's. I can't believe that we are 16. Actually,
No.
I just.
The first employment contract, when we got to this point, I'm jumping ahead slightly, but when we get to about 2014, 15, we got some cash from the NHS, and we then employed our first ever employee, which wasn't me.
Yeah, okay.
So I wasn't the first ever employee. And because of Christos's day job, Christos wrote the first employment contract.
Oh, perfect. So we've had our day one. From that point, how do things kind of grow and develop from there? Did they spiral? Was it steady? Was it sudden?
It was sudden, but there's a real context to this.
Sure.
The suddenness was because this is really strange, like thinking about all these different connections. So even though Gaynor wasn't a member of staff, etc., Gaynor and I worked together. So she's seen it right from the beginning.
Yeah, when you just had the little burner phone.
Yeah.
And scrabbling around trying to get rooms.
Yeah.
Or we would we'd use our place of work for Duncan to see. And we worked at Lifeline. We'd use Lifeline treatment rooms for Duncan to see some of those very early survivor clients.
Yeah.
Some of those clients were drug service clients as well, and that's what we found, wasn't it, working there at that time, is a lot of those men coming through those doors had suffered some kind of sexual violence or exploitation.
And we also, at the time, because we were both, first of all, both in the needle exchange, then we both went working upstairs in the community detox team, and we also had on the needle exchange, we also used to give out condoms, and because we had like a sex worker project, and so the sexual harms was just something that was really like common to us. Like it's something that we really understood. We even had situations where sex workers would be coming in for injecting equipment. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
But they weren't using for drug use. They were using in S&M play. And we had this whole big debate once where we had to kind of go, are we illegally allowed to do that?
Well, it was about harm reduction, and we were reducing harm. So yes, that's what we did. We give them the injecting equipment because it was the safest thing to do.
Yeah. So all of that was kind of going on in the background. I had friends and colleagues kind of helping, and it was really genuinely was like this organisation that everybody knew before it was properly an organisation. I always kind of talk about like the Wizard of Oz thing. So from the outside, it just looked like there was this great and powerful Oz, but then behind the curtain, it was just me fucking peddling for like dear life. And then one Wednesday night, I think it was Wednesday or a Thursday night, round about 9:00, ITV showed a documentary on what was a bit of a scandal about Jimmy Savile.
Right.
And that documentary became, I think, 2 episodes. I think it might have been Wednesday, Thursday. And as soon as that documentary aired, all hell broke loose.
Was that doors off the hinges? What are we talking?
Yeah, I mean, it's what's interesting is from a social perspective, now you can go and back and look, and the world turned upside down. We had never, I say we, I mean society, we'd never talked about sexual abuse and sexual violence in this particular way before. We had, if you go back to the newspapers and have a look at the time, there was random names flying about everybody. And I suppose Greater Manchester was quite at the centre of quite a lot of that conversation, because the early days of Savile's career were then under the spotlight. And the early days of Savile's career was when he was host of Top of the Pops. Top of the Pops was filmed in Manchester.
Yeah.
And then all these other names kind of came out. And so I suppose sexual abuse became this thing that everybody talked about. And here was me with a gang of people who had just kind of scrabbled together to have these conversations and start this organisation. And I suppose right time, right place, we were there.
Lightning in a bottle. I guess there's that difficulty as well of building up your expectations of how do we break down walls of silence. But when so many voices speak at once, survivors get lost in the narrative, and it can become either a political talking piece, or it can become not about the survivors themselves, but the celebrity culture of it. Something we still see now, of course.
Yeah.
And Manchester's role in many of these scandals, I think, will continue.
And also this was pre the Rochdale and Oldham and all of those kind of grooming scandals and stuff. And so, yeah, I think, I mean, even, like, I don't know about you, Game, but I remember, like at Needle Exchange, like, everybody was talking about it. And a lot of the lads, mainly were men, mainly because I think Needle Exchange overwhelmingly were always male injecting drug users. So many of the lads would talk about, so like on the news, for instance, they might be Knollview in Rochdale or Rose Hill.
Yeah.
So all of these, what we now know as these infamous places where abuse is happening to mainly boys that should never have been in these Borstals and what we kept seeing on the Needle Exchange and we kept seeing in the community detox team was essentially these lads going, I was at that school, and we were just getting these disclosures, weren't we? And we had to find a way of putting the lid back on because we had sort of the money that Christos has raised at that point. We hadn't raised enough money to become a registered charity. So even though we were a charity, we weren't registered with the Charity Commission England and Wales. And so we were literally, when Gaynor says, we were beg, stealing and borrowing rooms, we really were. It was like panhandling, kind of asking people to help.
What's down the sofa? Yeah.
Yeah.
Loose change. Yeah.
When did we have our first ever room? Because I remember that quite vividly because that was quite a big moment. We had a room and we had a desk.
That's right, yeah.
And I had a filing cabinet.
That's
I was
right.
really happy about that.
It had all been sitting on your lap, presumably beforehand.
And also because I remember, like, on a Saturday, like, a sort of like that was like I would be in there, sort of like doing volunteer files and sort of like paperwork. And
So that would have been 2014 to 15.
Yeah.
Because no, it wouldn't. It would have been a bit earlier. Sorry, it would have been. Yeah, it would have been like 2011 is when we got £5,000 of Zurich Community Trust. We added that £5,000 into the 4,300 that Christos had raised through legging it around Manchester. And then that took us over the financial threshold for the Charity Commission. Yep. So we could officially become a charity. So then let me think. Oh, I know. It was victim support. Victim support gave us the opportunity to kind of sit in a corner in their office in Manchester on Bloom Street. Yeah. And just near Charlton Street bus station.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where we had like Krista says, our first filing cabinet, and like literally like a filing cabinet that had one drawer with some papers connected to clients, and another drawer where it might be a couple of leaflets, and
it's the height of luxury.
Yeah, and like on a weekend, we just used to. Christos would be upstairs doing like admin stuff, and I might see a client downstairs in their like meeting room, and Yeah, it really was like all hands on deck.
I'm going to pull now to our chair, Craig. We're going to hear from him about a little bit more of those early dark times and bring us back up to speed and see where we are now.
Hello everybody, so I am Craig Harris and I am absolutely privileged to be here as the chair of We Are Survivors. We Are Survivors is 16 years old. I've been on the journey with We Are Survivors right the way back to almost the very beginning when I joined as a trustee before we became a charity. Very soon after, I was asked to be the deputy chair, which again, I was very humbled and honoured to take that position. And then very shortly after that, I became the chair. I've been the chair now for 15 years, and what an amazing 15 years it has been. There are too many achievements, accolades, and sort of wins and successes for me to describe on this very short message. The one thing I will say though is I am so pleased to see the movement that we've been driving and the campaigning that we have done to ensure that no survivor is left behind, to ensure that we break the silence for all survivors, and we ensure that the survivor agenda is at the top of everybody's priority list, and people have started to listen, and policy has started to change, and services have started to develop and grow. That for me is one of the biggest achievements that anyone in this sector could ever hope for. So I'm absolutely over the moon to be here to say that this is our 16th birthday. This is the year of consent for us, and we're doing a whole range of different things to look at what consent is, what consent means, and how important consent is. So I would hope you would join us on our continued journey. I hope you will continue to be a supporter or join us as a supporter if you're only just hearing this message for the first time. So a massive happy birthday to We Are Survivors. A huge thank you to all of our staff, absolutely excellent executive team, to our founder and chief exec Duncan, and especially to all our men and boys who we have the absolute honour to provide services for. So thank you everybody, and I hope you enjoyed this message.
So to kind of sew that old bit up, not that Craig reminded me of being an old bit, but to sew that bit up, Craig, we had this money. We were now a registered charity. Craig came into our life because I went to him as a commissioner to ask him for some money. And he said no.
And that was the end of the story.
People always think that, Craig gave us all this money. He didn't. He didn't give us any. But what he did was he said, I think I could help you there was about 3 weeks, and then we started chatting, and he said, I think I could help you in a governance way. Yeah. And then Craig helped me understand things like commissioning, business plans, etc., and along with Christos's help. And Christos wasn't a trustee still at this point; he was a volunteer. And when Michael was going through your MA, PhD, we would sit in bars drinking coffee as Michael was waxing lyrical about the latest Foucault thing he's just read, or all of this research. It started honing this business plan, and then we submitted the business plan to the NHS. Craig had to make declarations of conflicts of interest and stuff. We worked that out with our board and NHS. And we got £50,000 to do a poster campaign with. And we went out with me, Michael, Christos, your camera. Do you remember?
Oh my gosh.
We had hoodies on, looking all
oh my
solid.
God, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember.
Michael took the photographs.
Yeah.
And then we blanked the faces out and pixelated them, and we created our very first poster campaign.
We were on brand though, because I was wearing a blue hoodie even back then.
Oh God, you were.
Yes, yeah.
That shaped the organisation.
I found those posters actually the other day. Yes, both the pixelated ones and the ones with my actual face. I still don't know why we pixelated the face exactly. But...
Can't think.
Because this was for a charity. It wasn't for a perfume commercial.
Okay, I get it.
And so, then that's when it really started. So 2015, 2016, we are now an established organisation. We've got funds. I'm beginning to reach out to old friends. So like Graham, where I'd known Graham in my past life.
This was this related to theatre work? Was this magazine work?
Yeah. Well, Graham used to design and was the editor of Out.
Oh, of course, right.
Out Northwest.
You used to give me interviews with Stephanie Beecham?
Powers.
Stephanie Powers.
Yeah.
Sonia.
Toya. Lily.
All the connections.
Yeah. So I was in PR.
Yeah.
And literally, if I had a show that I needed to sell to a load of musical theatre gays, I'd just ring Graham and go, "Can you put me cast on the front page of your magazine, please?"
Never said no.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'd known Graham for years, and so I started speaking to Graham about like different ideas and such, and organisation's grown and grown and growing. Yeah. Gaynor and I left Lifeline.
You left before me.
Well, yeah.
So all this whole point, you've still been as part of Lifeline.
Yep.
Wow.
I got made redundant.
I kept my job.
Yeah. There was this whole big change in drug services. Christos had then written the employment contracts. We'd got people employed. I still wasn't employed. I was still volunteering. And I went and got myself another job. And I worked in what is now Action Together. But it was then called CVAT, Community Voluntary Action Tameside.
I can't think why they rebranded.
Yeah.
with a name like CVAT.
And I did that as a day job, and in the evening I'd drive back from my job into the victim support office, and I'd do a few hours there and then go home, and then weekends. And then Craig, we got a bit more money. In the voluntary sector, sometimes grants breed grants.
Yeah.
So when you get one grant and you can prove that you can manage it properly and you know how to deliver on a grant and a contract, that then gives other grant funders the confidence to kind of give you a bit more.
And it's sort of snowballing from there.
It's snowballing. And then Craig came to a visit to another office on Chapel Street, Hilton House. Sounds very glamorous.
It really does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really was. Corridor stank of piss, and then every time you just like stepped on a bit of the floor, it just creaked. And I genuinely thought I was going to go through the floor so many times. And we got our kind of first office, and we started employing a few more staff, and then Gaynor was employed as outreach
worker. So we had the project with the men's room.
Yeah.
So we were Safer Streets.
Yeah. And now Safer Streets is this massive thing.
Yeah. So we used to do the canal, the canal, the underpass.
Yeah.
Around there.
So tell us a little bit about men's room and how that sort of spiraled out. Was that a kind of a natural connection with the survivors in the organisation? Was that more broader outreach using the skills you'd already developed?
So I'll just say a tiny little bit about that. So our room that people know now, which previously was men's room, men's room was an organisation that I helped set up.
Yeah.
So there was 3 of us that set it up, but men's room came out of a project called Blue Room, which Michael and I did.
Right.
And so when we did this project around people at risk of sexual exploitation, selling sex, etc., etc. And because of like all the work I knew about Graham's long history of frontline, good old-fashioned harm reduction, guerrilla sexual health.
Street pounding, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That stuff that sadly I don't think enough organisations do, but trust me, we're fucking going back to doing this kind of stuff. Like really getting out there and making a difference. And so when we kind of got the sort of a little bit of cash together and went, do you know what, we've got to reach out to these lads because there is so much harm there, like potential harms that are happening, exploitation. There was quite a big case. We were very concerned about Blackpool and Manchester, lads being moved between. Do you remember that? And
it's
so
like another world.
I know
isn't
it does.
It's
It
like
is
another life.
Yeah.
Looking through the family photo album here.
Yeah, and then I just was like, right, I need someone that can just pound the streets, that knows like front line, where it's gritty, they can roll the sleeves up. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to ring Gaynor. Come and work for us.
Literally. What are you doing for work at the moment? Why? Yeah, you wanted someone who, would be okay out there on the streets and someone who could speak to the police without feeling intimidated. Something.
Little did they know how intimidated the police would be speaking to you, Gaynor. As we're speeding through the years now, we're catching up with the present day. So we're moving past and looking through a few campaigns and sort of seeing the organisation grow. Funding is starting to grow from there. More roles moving out. Hopefully, you've got more than one filing cabinet at this point.
Yeah.
I'm assuming. Yeah. Okay. All right.
I think we've got an actual, what do you call it? Like client database, like a proper system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What, 2 filing cabinets next to each other?
Yeah. And digital. We had a couple of laptops. We had a few more burner phones.
Not quite cartel level yet, but we're getting there. It felt to me like you went from the point of you having a little base of victim support. It was like every time I spoke to you after that, it's like, and we've moved again. Because it felt like you were just like, boom, boom, boom. And it happened, it felt from the outside, because I wasn't quite inside, wasn't quite outside. But it felt whenever I was catching up with you, that process of going from office to office and getting bigger and bigger happened so quickly.
Yeah. I think it was like, so, going back to the thing before about the context of Savile and all that kind of stuff. But I also think that it was really like, I think people were really ready for it. So when we started talking about abuse, it felt like people were going, oh my God, thank fuck for that. Finally.
Yeah.
And then they were just like, can you help this person? Can you help this person? Can you help this person? And so we had to catch up. And
a lot of the services, I think, had been having that. And certainly we found that from the different projects, you finding the projects you were working with, but also the people we were working with. It was this thing, when it came to referring people, there was somewhere to send people who were having issues with homelessness. There was somewhere to send somebody where they were having issues with addiction. And it felt like for a lot of the services we were engaging with, it was coming up so much with vulnerable men and the men they were working with. But there was just nowhere to send them. Yeah. And it was this totally unspoken about thing that people were kind of presenting with, that there was nowhere to go.
Yeah. And so finding somewhere to go, we started a service, as we call it now, but we started the Saferoom. The Saferoom was kind of a mutual, is sort of a facilitated mutual aid space. So again, going back to kind of our Gaynor and I working in drug and alcohol services.
It's a legacy of a talking group, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like it's a kind of AA, NA.
Yeah.
We were so familiar with that kind of model. And so, I put a little advert in the newspaper saying, men want to start this group and this is what we're going to do, and met a few people, and we started in the back of a coffee shop, which doesn't even exist anymore, in Northern Quarter, and we progressed from there to Friends Meeting House.
Oh yeah.
And I can't remember, Thursday, every Thursday, we had the Saferoom. So I facilitated it. And then as we got more staff, a couple of other people facilitated it. It was always facilitated by a survivor. And that is the core element of it still today, which I think
100%.
is so massively important.
And we're proud of it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really strong model of mutual aid. Regardless of what people think about, the kind of the faith and religion aspect of the anonymous movement, AANA, etc. There's a real power of being together, and that's what the Saferoom. That's how it started. I'm so fucking proud that there are members of staff now that were people who started in the Saferoom. And actually, one of your team was a member of the Saferoom, and we had a bout of illness. And it was kind of like, right, we're going to have to stop the Saferoom because I can't do it this week, and et cetera, et cetera. And he just said, well, can I not volunteer? And honestly, we were like, don't really know how that works, but yeah, like you just run it and then just ring me when you've finished. And that's literally how we started.
And so then it kind of passes on, and you've got that legacy going forward now. It's really, really interesting seeing people who've been in that space then going on to run safe rooms or going on to run other similar groups. Mm. There's a huge inherited legacy of history, and just seeing that and seeing how it all starts from drug services. You take the principles of community, you put survivors in a room, they start talking, and then they keep talking and keep talking and keep talking. Mm. So much of that has been key at the heart of the campaigns we've run. I'm thinking about things like One Blue String. Mm-hmm. So there was a program about switching out one of 6 strings on a guitar with a blue one in order to show solidarity for the statistic that 1 in 6 men will be affected by unwanted sexual experiences. Could be sexual harms, violence, and abuse. And just something as simple as that little act of solidarity, once again in the same blue that Christos picked out for you with his hoodie back in the day, presumably painted the blue room the same colour as well.
Did. I think we might have nicked it from our original project.
Do we want to confess to any more crimes here, or has it all been contained in the burner phones? All the burner phones we've lost.
Yeah. I reserve my right to remain silent.
I think
blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But you know this, George, as a safe room facilitator. Yeah. That it is this real power of togetherness, and I think that's why when I know we'll talk about it in a bit, but that's why very very fast forward, there was just such a natural connection with our brother organisation with Mandem. About this kind of men being together, talking, supporting, working things out, and I am with Dan and with Trung. They're both people who we sat together and worked shit out. I think it's the easiest thing to say, and now knowing that both people are people who are doing that for others. It's just so exciting is the word I always use, but it's not the right word, and I don't know what the word is.
Empowering.
Yeah. Hugely empowering to see.
There's a natural transition as well. When you're looking at survivors who, and I completely agree with the power of survivors in a space led by survivors, in a room with other survivors. It's almost like there's cells in a body, and when a survivor's in a room with someone else, even if they've built up all these barriers of trust these walls and guards that they've kind of been behind all their life. As soon as another survivor walks into a room and they get talking, it's like the cells of one body recognize that other person as being one and the same. It's just permeable. It's just you're in a room with someone who some part of them understands some part of you, and you just talk, and it's straight from the heart, and it just goes from there. I think there's something really, really useful, though, about being able to take that model of you get a survivor who likely trusts very few people, to meet another survivor and see that there are people out there I can talk and I can share. And then seeing that kind of transform into saying, well, it's not just survivors I need to talk to, it's other men. And that's part of our wider mission as well. And that's why I think Mandem Meetup is such a valuable part of kind of this wider umbrella, this sort of wider family, because it gives survivors that chance to open their front door, take a step out in a safe environment as well.
And it gives men who are using our service as well, who are hidden survivors, the opportunity to break their silence.
100%. Yeah.
And I think, like, as you were just talking, I was thinking, I remember your first, I remember what you were wearing. Because I remember having this, this kind of, I don't know, like this real visceral reaction to when you walked in.
How bad was the outfit?
It was more to do with.
I came smart.
Yeah.
Double-breasted, wool jacket, belted. I should imagine. Yeah. That's what I pictured him.
That's why, because you were younger than some of the other people. That it was proper, like, I've been working in the bank all day, suited and booted kind of thing. And I remember coming in and me just going, oh my God, like, how is this going to work? Because I think up until that point, the majority of the survivors, because of our work in, mine and Gainer's work in drug services, mine and Michael's work in with sex workers, I was volunteering in the LGBT organisation that Graham was working in. So I was very familiar. And this was like somebody who was just completely different.
Yeah.
And and I remember him walking in and sitting down and just being like the most authentic and overconfident at the same time. Well, actually, authentic, overconfident, and terrified at the same time. This mishmash of, but it was just, Danny just made your presence felt.
I do. I remember walking in because I remember first being informed about, back then, Survivors Manchester.
Yeah.
And I looked on the website, and as I was reading the homepage, the words just jumped out. It was like it was just written for me, tailor-made for survivors. So I was like, I'll give this a try. I rang up. There was a cancellation. They got me in the next day. And then it was like, I wanted to do peer support with other survivors because mine was recent. So it was 2016. It happened in New York. I came to the organisation. It was January the 17th, 2018. So it's literally, I have now officially been removed from the system of GPDR because it's 7 years. So it was 7 years ago I walked those 3 flights of stairs in Hilton House. They say it's a journey, not a destination. It definitely was a journey. To the top of this terraced house. Yeah. The waiting area was 2 chairs that were bunched together, and then I was waiting there. I was like, I buzzed in, I was waiting, and I came out. And then I was allowed to kind of go into the Saferoom the following week and at a friend's meeting house and just walked in. And I did not know what to expect. I was like, do I put my cards on the table? Do I what? Duncan had kind of done, we do check-ins, the rules of the Saferoom. And there wasn't that many of us in that night. I think there was about 6 or 7. And I was the second person in. And I was like, I just came out of it because I was I was dead nervous. It wasn't what I was expecting, but I just felt really confident with the people sat in the room, and all I've done is say hello to them, and that was kind of my journey then going forward. And that for me is why peer support and meeting other survivors, I will always be a huge advocate for.
100%.
Yeah.
It feels like it's at the core of all of it, that sense of community and how that's always shone through in everything we've done. It's always been about that visibility. It's always been about that togetherness. I think that's really, really relevant as well when you look at how the organisation changed names. And that was to me, I remember, being in Manchester and being too nervous to pick up the phone. But I think it was the change of name that kind of inspired a little bit more confidence in me about saying, no, this is an organisation where I can be a member of staff and be a survivor. I don't have to put my guard up. I don't have to not be genuine to myself. And I think that was really, really crucial in terms of my journey in.
We talked about, so by this point, Christos is on the board and Craig and Evan, and we kind of talked about, I suppose, the identity for quite a while, didn't we? And lent into having conversations with the expert reference group, so our lived experience panel. I always describe them as being like the ERG are my moral governance, whereas the Board of Trustees are my legal governance. And just having conversations with some people and saying, I don't know whether Survivors Manchester, we're very well known, but it's really restrictive. And a couple of people saying that they didn't know because I live in Stockport, I don't know whether I can come to you.
Right.
And this real kind of like, that's a barrier. We need to remove that barrier.
Yeah.
And then talking to Chris, our deputy CEO, and Chris just kept saying, just keep it really simple, and taking on board the conversations that we'd had at board level, the conversations with staff, the conversation with the ERG. And I was just sat with Chris in our office and kind of this ping of, well, we are survivors. And then the ERG kind of going, yeah, but that's what we are. And then me just going that is just genius. And then by this point, Graham's on. Yeah, you were on the payroll by that point.
I think I just joined as staff when my bum hadn't touched the seat. And you'd asked me to rebrand the organisation.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Tails and left. I thought that is a big ask.
Yeah.
But one of the strengths of this organisation, one of the strengths of you, Duncan, is you put your trust in people that you believe can deliver. And for someone who's trying to deliver that work, it instills a lot of confidence and instills a lot of belief in what you can achieve. I didn't think that I could achieve a rebrand of an organisation. But it was I hate to use the word, but it was surprisingly easy.
Sure.
Because it was already building on the reputation of the organisation. I always kind of hate using the word brand when it comes to an organisation like We Are Survivors because it's so clinical. But it was such a trusted brand. People saw the logo, they saw what we were putting out and their experience of the organisation. It's all tied into the tone of how we communicate. And Dan, you mentioned earlier about how you read those words on the website and you felt like it was speaking to you. That's the core of a brand for an organisation like that. And I think that's at the heart of everything we've ever done.
Yeah.
In terms of how we communicate with people.
And I think you're right. I think there's certainly some. I find it still to this day hard to trust. That's my survivor stuff. But when I trust somebody, when I ask someone to do something, I trust that they can do it. And so just before Graham's bum hit the chair,
got you.
Previous to that, I'd been the one that had always done the social media, saying a few things, putting some things on Twitter, etc. But then I was leaning on Michael Atkins because pandemic.
Oh God, what did I do then?
You did our social media.
Did I? Yeah. But you know what's funny is because I've done lots of different things. I feel like they put me in many different roles, attempting to find something they could actually do. And it turns out that actually just being a gobshite was the final resting place, right?
That's your job title, yeah.
Gobshite.
Well, because
official gobshite.
Well, because cheddar had become so well known
for no apparent reason. It was like, well, if you can do that with that, we've actually got something important to say.
Well, I remember, and Theo does this now as our digital communications coordinator, but I was just like, I'd say some old shit or I'd promote something and it would just be there. And I remember you saying to me, right, love, we're having a coffee. Right, love, I don't know how you feel about this, but you're just going to have to do it. We need to delete stuff off Instagram. And I was like, why? And I'm thinking, no, you're not deleting anything. And he was going, and he just gave me this big lecture. And because we've been friends for so long, I stopped listening and thought, oh, just whatever, just do it. And it really connected my mind. And this is funny because my previous career was in PR and marketing.
Sure.
But there was no such thing as the internet, believe it or not.
Right.
There genuinely was.
Yeah.
When I left, when I was leaving the theatre, we were just getting websites. I remember with my boss sitting in our director's office. He was the only person that had a computer connected to the internet, and we were trying to send a electronic mail, because that's what we called it.
Oh well.
To Cameron Macintosh.
Right. Okay.
Because we had, I think it was like Les Mis or something like that, and it said address, and Sue, if you're listening, she will verify this. I typed in the postal address, and then we were like, how does it get to letterbox? We had no idea. And that was like 1997, 1998, something like that.
Wow.
And so I'd never learned how to communicate digitally.
Yeah.
And yet this drag queen just...
But it's linked, isn't it? So because with drag, obviously you do things big and bold and you create this kind of image that stands in front of you. And that's what brands do. But it also links into what you were talking about, what Daniel does, and when they walk into a room and the way they're wearing a particular outfit. Yeah. You know, we're all the time kind of reading these images of one another, and our imagination flows into that image of the person that you just get.
Sure.
And I always find that really fascinating in relationship to survivors, because there's something about what you were saying earlier about the immediate recognition when you know somebody else is a survivor. And the fact that I feel like men are very good at branding to a certain extent, but they're very good at maybe not necessarily showing what they want to show or what they need to show sometimes. And that entire process of simplification was the fact that you had a bunch of stuff up there that was just getting in the way of letting people see what it was you needed them to see, which is like, this is the organisation, this is what we do. Yeah. You can tell within 3 swipes, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But there's something there, isn't there, about the cluttered way that you present yourself and how the cluttered presentations often hide a lot of what's important.
And I think that's a really good point, that. And I think, so whilst you kind of say whilst Graham, you say it's like, oh my God, can I even do that? I had so much trust in you because we'd worked together, because when you were doing Out Northwest, God rest his soul, but if Paul O'Grady, if something went wrong, he would tell you. And I was always terrified of getting something wrong. And so being able to come to the magazine, to Out, and just go, oh, can you do this? And it just be right. I already had years of experience of you just doing it right. And so it was when we were at the board, we decided we are survivors. The ERG was so like, this is it. The staff were going, yeah. We'd even quietly told some of the lads that come into the drop-in.
Just to see how it landed?
Yeah, just to kind of go, what do you think of this? And, people just kept saying, like, oh my God, that's like, it felt like the right thing to do.
Yeah.
To then, say to Graham, first of all, can you basically take the organisation and completely change its name, give us a brand new look? Oh, and also, here's an apprentice. And Theo was our first ever...
Born.
Theo was born.
And we grew him in a lab, yeah.
Yeah, and then, here you go, Graham, Immaculate Conception, here's your new baby.
What's really interesting to me is changing the name and the look of any organisation always invites so much criticism. If the BBC changes their logo just a tiny bit, there's a ton of criticism. And unless you're shielding me from it, I never saw, without exaggeration, one complaint or one worried email or concerned communication saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? I don't understand. And that's so unique in terms of the blanket change in how the organisation looked and what it was called. So that's...
The only one worry that I got, and we got so much kind of congratulations, this is amazing, brilliant. The only one worry was just one line where someone said, effectively, does that mean that now you're going to start seeing everybody and will I get lost? And was like, no, it's the name. And they're like, right, yeah, that's fine. I love it. So it wasn't even a worry about the name change. It was a worry that we were going to get too big.
And we communicated that really succinctly at the beginning.
Yeah, but I don't think like you're giving yourself enough credit, and that happens a lot in this organization actually, because I think because everything we do is survival-led, even the rebrand of the name, when it usually goes wrong, it's because like someone that has no idea about it, like an agency, a fancy agency,
It's
does
been outsourced.
and they spend millions on things like that. But actually, like staying true to the way we do things here, it was again, our survivors that led that. It was an organic sort of like next step by survivors, and it wasn't just a decision that was made. So, from an outsider, and I think that's why it landed so well and then executed so well as well, because it just stayed, really true to the sort of like very authentic. It wasn't, for any other reason.
Nobody was telling you what to say, but at the same time, the thing that you then said was the mission of the organisation.
Yeah.
So in its very title, you are breaking silence and attributing to the people here, right?
Yeah,
So, it is that boldness of actually turning your mission into the title of the organisation.
Now we're in a space where silence gets broken every single day.
Absolutely.
That fits the same mission and values, everything we've tried to capture in how the logo looks is how we want the space to be and how it feels. Before we just hear from a champion of how that space feels, as in he tells me when I don't set the bin up correctly or if I leave something lying out. I would like to point out that the building is now far more accessible. We're not up 3 flights of stairs. There are no corridors that smell of urine that I have found so far during my time here, which is much, I'm sure, to the benefit of Trung, who is one of our leads on accessibility.
Yeah.
But let's jump now to Jamie, who is our Director of Operations, and hear from him.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm the Operations Director here at We Are Survivors. I've been here and employed for 8 years now, but I've been involved within the organisation for about 10. I first came into the organisation just hot desking whilst I was at university writing a dissertation on the sexual abuse of males in elite sports. Through the dissertation, it's where I met Duncan, and it was Duncan himself that invited me to actually hot desk within the offices so I could get a feel for the organisation, a feel for what I was researching. And then I just moved to working at Survivors Manchester full time. I went into COVID as operations assistant and then moved up to senior operations assistant, to operations lead and now to operations director. The main thing that I'm looking forward to is just looking back and realizing how we've grown and looking back on that and looking back on the organization that we were and what we've come to. It's exciting to have everything that's going to come, the Festival of Consent, just the whole year of consent, learning about what people's perceptions of that is, but just seeing where we've come from and how we've grown. That's what I want to see most. I just want to say a massive 16th birthday to We Are Survivors, and I'm amazed at how far we've come as an organisation, and I'm excited for the next 16 years, but I'm excited for the next year to come and to see, for everybody to see what's in store and just to celebrate us and to celebrate everything that we're about.
Just before, because I do want to hear Trung and, you know, the kind of the accessibility, because I love the fact that you picked up on that, George. I think I think what Graham created in a brand is so accessible.
Yeah.
I remember having that conversation with you where you literally spent about 10 minutes telling me why there's a full stop there. Like, and it is so important when you get to it, and the square brackets and all that kind of stuff. Jamie, when Jamie first said, he'll kill me for saying this.
Here we go.
I love this bad boy to bits. When he first started, he came in as a volunteer. So the course he was doing was sports science, I think it was, and he was looking at all these big high-profile cases where there'd been footballers who had wrote in their autobiographies about being abused, and he was just researching all of that, and that was kind of what his academic research was, and he was so bright with it. But when we were in the old building in Hilton House, we had 2 rooms next door to each other, and someone before said about, I think it was you, Dan, about the like 2-story house. It was like literally like a terraced house. Like any minute now, you could just imagine that Ilda Ogden was just going to come out and start like mopping the step and stuff. And Gaynor, myself, a few other people used to share one office, and then next door was all the therapists.
Right.
And then there was this little hot desk, and Jamie was just sat at the desk doing his, like literally doing his research, and Chris, who's our CEO now, Chris was my PA at the time and also operations lead. And Chris came into the office and said, "Who's that kid next door doing his homework?" And I was like, literally like, "Which kid?" And I got up out of my chair, went into the next room, opened the door, and I just saw Jamie like writing, and I came out and I was laughing my head off, and I said, "That's not a kid, that's Jamie from the university." And Chris was like, "I swear to God, I thought it was a client's child that we were just babysitting while he had therapy."
As far as I'm aware, that's not a service we currently offer, babysitting.
We haven't got a creche.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today for this very special episode of Beyond the Silence. We hope you've enjoyed your time here. Remember, if you do need help and you want to get in contact, the best place to go is our website, wearesurvivors.org. But you can also get in contact with us via our support email, that is support@wearesurvivors.org.uk. Beyond that, you can find us on all good social media websites at This Is Survivors. And if you felt inspired by this episode to share your own story or artwork, or just want to see what others have already shared, you can always search out the hashtag #BreakTheSilence and find us from there. From our safe space to yours, thank you.